A few weeks ago, we changed gears and began looking at the topic of lamenting. And I have just found such depth in that topic. It really has so many facets to it. And the more you begin to look at this topic, the more you begin to see the power and the freedom in honest, heartfelt prayers. Because to lament is to be so real and so raw. For make no mistake, we all have times in our life where we are going through or have gone through difficult times. Can somebody do me a huge favor and shut that, what do you call it? Thank you. I'd love to hear it, but if I can hear it, I know you can hear it. Perhaps you can relate to this example I came across of someone who simply put had a bad day. A bricklayer sent this letter to his boss explaining why he needed to take some sick leave. He wrote, "I arrived at the job after the storm hit. I checked the building out and saw that the top of the building needed repairs. I rigged a hoist and a boom, attached the rope to a barrel, and pulled bricks to the top. When I got and pulled the barrel to the top, I secured the rope at the bottom. After repairing the building, I went back to fill the barrel with the leftover bricks. I went down and I released the rope to lower the bricks. The barrel was heavier than I, and it jerked me off the ground. I decided to hang on. Halfway up, I met the barrel coming down and received a blow to the shoulder. I hung on and went to the top where I hit my head on the boom and caught my fingers in the pulley. In the meantime, the barrel hit the ground and burst open, throwing bricks all over. This made the barrel lighter than I, and I started down at high speed. Halfway down, I met the barrel coming up and received a blow to my shins. I continued down and fell upon the bricks, receiving cuts and bruises. At this time, I must have lost presence of my mind because I let go of the rope and the barrel came down and hit me on the head. I respectfully request sick leave." That's what you would describe as a bad day. Maybe that's how you feel right now. You feel like you're getting hit coming and going. This is why we lament. For lamenting helps us voice our sorrow. It helps us voice our true feelings, and it even helps us voice our pain. Lamenting is more than just prayer, which it is, but it really can be described as a wrestling with God. Lamenting and wrestling with God is not a sign of weakness, but it's actually a sign of strength. I don't know about you, but I've never thought that a wrestler was a weak person. They're strong. They're in shape. You recall when Jacob wrestled with God. He's all alone. He wrestled with God, and it changed him forever. It changed him. You know, wrestling with God, not just in the good, but in the difficult times of life, can literally begin to change us. It begins to add a depth to our relationship with God that we may have never experienced before, wrestling with God. Because, see, the only way you can wrestle with someone is you must be close to them. You can't wrestle someone from far away. But when you're wrestling, you are close together. And when you're wrestling with God, you are close to Him. And you're building a depth and intimacy that can literally begin to change you. If you were here on Sunday for the prayer meeting, there was wrestling going on. There was wrestling going on as we prayed for Ruth and Jacob and the children and the Larkin family. We were wrestling and crying out to God, and I did not walk away from that meeting and that time thinking I was more distant from God. No, I walked away going, oh my goodness, there is such power in the name of Jesus. It adds a depth to your relationship. So as we continue, we are going to continue looking, and we're going to begin looking at a couple Psalms. And today we're going to look at Psalm 13. This is a psalm written by David. And when you go into this, I want to say something about laments that you'll notice. Is many of them have 4 steps. These 4 simple steps. 1, you turn to God. When you're lamenting, you are turning to God. 2, you voice your complaint. You're not going to God for no reason, but you are actually telling Him what the situation is. Thirdly, you begin to ask for help. You ask for help. You're going to God for a reason, and you're asking for His help. And fourthly, this is such a big part about lamenting, is you're choosing to trust. You're choosing to trust God. If you weren't trusting God, you wouldn't be going to Him in the first place. And all it would be was a pointless and worthless complaint. But instead, you're going to God because you're choosing to trust Him. And see, what's so powerful about lamenting is it not only drives us to God, but it begins to drive us to worship. It also begins to drive us to worship God if we allow it. As you jump into this, it's really interesting, and perhaps you feel like David does in this psalm as I get ready to read it. You have a feeling that you just can't quite shake. You have a feeling that you've been forgotten. And this is what David is going through as he writes this psalm. They don't know the exact date of when he wrote this psalm, but many believe that it was written when he was on the run from King Saul. And if you know anything about that time, it was a rough time for David. I'm going to read the 6 verses as we jump into this. Psalm 13, O Lord, how long will you forget me? Forever? How long will you look the other way? How long must I struggle with anguish in my soul, with sorrow in my heart every day? How long will my enemy have the upper hand? Turn and answer me, O Lord my God. Restore the sparkle to my eyes, or I will die. Don't let my enemies gloat, saying, we have defeated him. Don't let them rejoice at my downfall. But I trust in your unfailing love. I will rejoice because you have rescued me. I will sing to the Lord because he is good to me. Wow. In the words of this psalm, you hear the raw, unfiltered cry of the soul of David. You know, I've said this a few times, but I don't want you to be misled into thinking that because you are a Christian, you have to hide any and all frustrations that you may have. That doesn't mean those go away. Because here you see in Psalm 13 that David feels forgotten, he feels abandoned, he feels overwhelmed. I keep coming back to that simple yet profound truth written by Glenn Packiam, where he said this about lamenting. Lamenting is proof of the relationship. It is proof of your relationship with God. To cry out to God means you know you can cry out to him. I think we miss that. Lamenting, when you're crying out to God, it's very vulnerable, but it is a proof of the relationship. Because one of those powers that comes in lamenting is it just builds your relationship with God. The reverse of this is also true. And I want to share this with you, and it's a sad story. It's written by Dr. Russell Moore in his book, Adopted for Life. He describes going to an orphanage in Russia as they were in the process of pursuing adoption. The silence from the nursery was eerie. The babies in the cribs never cried. Not because they never needed anything, but because they had learned that no one cared enough to answer. Children who are confident in the love of a caregiver cry. For the Christian, our lament when taken to our Father in heaven is proof of our relationship with God, of our connection to a great caregiver. You see, when we despair, that's the image. We're quiet, hopeless, oppressed, we give up. The list could go on. But when you know, when you know that God is real, it doesn't quiet you. I'm reminded immediately of blind Bartimaeus, if you know the story. He's a blind man. Blind Bartimaeus, that's what he's known by. First name blind, second name Bartimaeus. Anyway, he's sitting on the roadside. Crowd comes by and he finds out Jesus is in that crowd. So he cries out, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And they all tell him to be quiet, which is what many of us do. We're told to be quiet. We're quiet. We're like those babies right there in that nursery. But Bartimaeus says, wait a second. I'm in a bad situation, and my Savior is walking by. So he cries out all the louder, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And because of that, guess who heard him? Jesus. And Jesus heals him of his blindness. Don't stop crying out to God. Don't stop. No matter what's going on, no matter what situation you face, don't stop crying out to God. David didn't. And look at how he starts this chapter. He said, how long will you forget me? How long will you look away? How long must I struggle? How long will my enemy have the upper hand? We find ourselves sometimes afraid to verbalize these feelings and these emotions. For we get in this mindset that it seems borderline blasphemous so we just keep quiet. Not David. If you've read through the Psalms, you find him oftentimes crying out in this way. He says in Psalm 10, "Why do you stand far away, O Lord?" In Psalm 44, "Why do you hide your face and forget our affliction and oppression?" In Psalm 71, he says, "God, do not be far away from me. Hurry to my aid." He gives us 4 how long questions. How long will you forget, look the other way? How long must I struggle? How long will the enemy have the upper hand? David describes rather powerfully and honestly the depths of his despair. He has no problem expressing his emotion. And a very important fact to note is David is presenting this problem and this situation, and I keep coming back to this, he's presenting it to God. I came across a quote. Instead of complaining to men about God, David complained to God about men. And sometimes we flip that. And it's interesting to note that in all of those questions, David mentions how long. This must be something, this feeling of abandonment that has been going on for quite a while in his life. How long? Have you ever been in a situation like that where the difficulties seem to be going on day after day for so long that you have a tough time remembering the good days? You wake up every morning crying out, "Where have all the good times gone?" You're wondering where they went. You see, the problem doesn't reside in not feeling God's presence. The problem is when we don't seek God's presence. And what happens is we go through a tough time and we stop seeking God. Keep going after God. So if this is written, think about this. When David was on the run from King Saul, have you just looked at that situation just in a nutshell? David has been anointed the very next king of Israel. David is seeking God. Saul is not at all. Saul, David's enemy, is enjoying the comforts of the palace while David is in a cave with a rock for a pillow. David has already had many military successes, and this is the thanks I get? You know how easy it would be to think that way? He is God's anointed one, and he knows it. How long, O Lord? The situation does appear to be bleak. The enemy does appear to be winning. God even does appear to be silent. It's interesting to note when you jump into the Bible, you understand there's other examples in the Bible where people felt that way. You have Joseph in the Old Testament languishing in prison for years for doing the right thing. You have Paul continually imprisoned for the crime, you ready? Preaching Jesus. And here we have David. So if you ever have that feeling like you've been abandoned, I'm going to tell you something. You're in good company. You're in good company. What does David do? And what should we do? You see, what I've noticed is at times when life throws something big at us, when life throws that big curveball, baseball starts Thursday, we have a tendency, that's why it's on my mind, we have a tendency to believe that we are doing something wrong. We immediately take stock of our lives and begin to go, what I could have done different or should have done differently. And at times, I don't know if it's just me, we begin to beat ourselves up. You ever done that? Have you ever done that? Just gave you examples of 3 men that had difficult situations and they had not done that kind of stuff. Again, I go back to the fact, you got to remember, the enemy does not like you. So David, instead of doing that, what does he do? He cries out to God. And I honestly believe that we, as followers of Christ at Bridgeway Church on a Sunday morning, we forget the red carpet treatment that we have to the very throne room of God. I honestly think we do. The writer of Hebrews is this verse that you all know in verse 16 is so real and it has such real implications in our lives. He says, "So let us come boldly, confidently, not weakly or meekly, but come boldly to the throne room of our God." And he doesn't just say our God, he says our gracious God. What a great descriptive word. He says there, where will you find this? In the very presence of God. When you actually go into the throne of our gracious God, he says there you will receive, not might receive, not maybe if you were a good boy today, but you will receive His mercy, It's very unmerited favor, because let me tell you, we've done nothing to deserve the mercy of God. He says, look, and we will find grace to help us when we need it most. You know, there's times we like to tell, and I do the same thing. I feel like I'm waiting and waiting and waiting on God, and maybe I just need to wait till I need it the most, because that's when He's going to give it to me. When we need it most. You know, you look at this passage and in just these first two verses, and David's crying out, God, where are you? And you begin to look about the Israelites and their culture, and they believed when the face of the Lord was turned towards them, everything would go well. So you understand what's going on in David's life. If God's face is turned towards me, I should not be sleeping in a cave. If God's face is turned towards me, it was a sign of blessing. It was a sign of acceptance. If things and situations were bad, that would be the complete opposite. For the very worst thing that could happen to anyone would be for God to turn His face from you. It would be the very same thing as abandonment, which is literally the very cries of David's heart. So I enjoy the very honesty of David as he looks and cries out in this psalm, because it does describe the depths of despair that he feels and the depths of his emotion. You see the battle raging inside of David. The battle between how he feels, the pressure of life all around, and what you see as we continue, what he knows to be true. What he knows to be true about God. And that's where the battle is. We go through tough situations, and we do this crying out, and it's this battle between what we're going through and what we really know about God. What's going to win? What's going to win? Because David goes on, and he says in verse 3 and 4, he gives this request. He says, turn and answer me. Turn to me, God. His back, you remember, that's what they believed. If the blessings weren't there, God had turned His back. Turn to me, O Lord. Answer me. Restore the sparkle. Don't let my enemies gloat. Don't let them rejoice. You begin here in verses 3 and 4 to see the psalm. I almost said palm. It's almost Palm Sunday. You begin to see the psalm changing direction from the problem and the lament to now David is making a request of God. And there is a phrase that I so like in this passage right here. Restore the sparkle to my eyes. The situation isn't great for David. What's going to regain and help him regain that sparkle? He's pouring out his heart to God. He's asking God, turn to me. He's asking God, not just turn to me, restore the sparkle to my eye. He's pouring out his heart, not just in a complaint, but asking that God will restore him. Has the sparkle gone out of your eye? Has the situations that you've been facing beat you down to the point that the sparkle was once there, but now it's just not? Dim eyes in the Hebrew culture were a very sign that the very vital powers were weakening. Bright eyes and sparkling eyes were a sign of life. David is crying out and asking God, bring me back. Bring me back to life again. What you notice about this psalm as he's gone through this complaint and lament, and then in verse 3 and 4 he makes his requests. He's not asking so that he could just be free of all his problems. David, as we see in verse 4, had a fear. You want to know what that fear was? That his enemies would rejoice at his defeat. If David, God's very anointed king, were defeated, it would make God look bad. And David lets God know that. You see this also in the life of Moses, where God is so, frustrated with the Israelites that he tells Moses, stand back. I'm going to destroy them all. You ever felt like that? I'm going to destroy them all, and I'm going to begin again. And Moses says, don't do that. Don't do that. It'll make you look bad, oh God. Moses pleads with God not to do so. And he has a reason. He doesn't want God to look bad. So now we get to the last two verses, which to me are oh so powerful. You have the conclusion. This problem has been going on for such a long time. He then makes this request, and now we see what David does in verse 5 and 6. But, again, those powerful three-letter words, but I trust in your unfailing love. I will rejoice. You have rescued me. I will sing. He is good to me. To worship is what he turns to. He begins this psalm crying out to God, feeling God had forgotten him, that the enemy was winning. It was a horrible time if there ever was one. And as David cries out to God, which is what lamenting does, you're crying out to God. It begins to refocus our eyes from the situation, from the problem, to the one that can actually help that situation, God. David did change. He changed his focus. You see that move from despair to supplication to worship. Beautiful truth. David doesn't remain in his despair. You can't remain there. Many of us get stuck in those first two verses. We're stuck right there in the complaint. How long, how long, how long? Where are you, where are you, where are you? Why? We're stuck. We haven't moved over. God, here's what I need you to do. And he goes even further. And I got to say this, he's still in the cave. The situation hasn't changed. But one thing you notice when you look at the laments from Jeremiah to Habakkuk to Jehoshaphat, you need to allow God to speak to you. You need to allow God to work in you. You need to be reminded of all that God has done and all that he will do, which is what worship begins to do. It begins to change that focus. Real heartfelt prayer and worship to God changes that. We may begin with woe is me, but we end with great is our God. That's how it ends. David doesn't turn away from God, he turns to God. And he makes that choice, which is so important in a lament. He makes a choice to trust in God. We're all faced with that choice. Are we going to trust God, as we were singing today, in the middle of the fire? Are we going to trust God in the middle of the ocean? And every time we're trying to push the water away, it just keeps swarming us down? Are we still going to trust God even in the darkest of times, in the valleys of life? We can worship. Because something I've understood about praise and worship is it's not based on feelings. It's not based on my emotions. It's not based on my surroundings. You think about Paul and Silas in the book of Acts. This is a very powerful reminder. They are thrown into a dungeon after they've been beaten with rods. Not a red letter day. This is their situation. Paul and Silas didn't wait till the chains fell off to praise. They praised and then the chains fell off. I think we miss that. The chains were still on as they worshiped God. David is still in the cave. Saul is still on the throne. But he says, God, great is your faithfulness. What are we crying out to God? What are we saying? Do we trust who he is? Trust God. We can trust God because of the very nature of God and because of who he is. David states, I will trust. Here's a powerful truth for us to remember in Psalm 145. You can go ahead and come on up and you can begin passing out the communion elements today. The psalmist writes in Psalm 145, the Lord is close to all who call on him, to all who call on him in truth. He continues, he grants the desires of those who fear him. He hears their cries for help and he rescues them. So David can say at the end of this passage, I trust, I will rejoice, I will sing. It's okay to lament and cry out to God. Don't be one who throws in the towel and quits on God. Petition God, which just means telling God what you want, what you need God to restore. Praise God in the midst of the valley. If you need a reminder, hopefully this passage in Psalm 145 and the fact that we're doing communion this morning. We are sharing communion and we do this and we share these elements together as a body of believers as a very powerful reminder of the sacrifice that Jesus made for us. His body broken. His blood poured out for us. And because of that, Jesus has paved the way, as we looked at earlier, so that we can now enter the very throne room of God. Without this, that doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. We can take the elements today, and it's an act of worship. It's an act of gratitude for all he has done. So before we take the elements, go ahead and bow your heads with me. And if there is something that you know you're going through, that something this day, and maybe you're here today and you are in that boat, those first two verses, how long, how long, how long? This is a time to talk to God about it. This is a time to really be honest with God. Because as we share the elements, it's a reminder of what he did and that his faithful love for you has never, ever wavered, nor has it failed.